Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. So glad to see you all today. As you enter the room, please take a moment to get yourself settled. Take a deep breath, whatever you need to do to arrive here. Maybe get a drink of water, grab something to take notes, turn your phone on silent. We still have some folks trickling in, and we'll get started in just a minute here. Thanks so much for making the time to join us today. If you're just coming in, welcome. Take a moment to get yourself settled and we'll get started. So welcome everybody to the Make Your Land Available for Farming webinar. My name is Rachel Bryce, and I'll be your host and coordinator for this afternoon. This webinar is brought to you thanks to the Land for Farmers project, which is supported by the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Project, funded by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And the programming is brought to you by the New England FarmLink Collaborative, which is made up of Connecticut FarmLink, Maine FarmLink, Vermont Land Link, and Land for Good. And together, in addition to running these educational webinar series, we also host and administer the New England Farmland Finder website, which is a clearinghouse for farming properties around New England that allow property posters and farm seekers to post about and find available farm properties in all 6 New England states. And today I'm calling to you from unceded Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook territory, currently known as New Hampshire. At Land for Good, we believe that land is something to be honored and treasured, not exploited. And we have an awareness of the very real lived history of the indigenous people and nations in a long area of colonialism. So we're taking a moment now to honor and acknowledge those who have stewarded the land before us and continue to do so to this day. And if you're interested in this map, I encourage you to visit the Native Land Digital website, which is an online map that wipes away current colonial borders to reveal the colorful and complex overlap of past and current indigenous territories, languages, and treaties. And so you can, when visiting this website, actually put in the place where you live and find out a little bit more about the history of that place. And I'll just put that link in the chat for you all to view. This is session 1 of 2 of the Make Your Land Available for Farming webinar, and we'll be discussing many of the different benefits of making your land available, what to expect from and how to communicate with farmers. We'll make some time for you to hear from a visiting guest speaker, a person who is farming here in New England, and we'll share a few tips and tricks for how to post your property on the New England Farmland Finder website, which I mentioned. Next week, we'll go into depth into some different methods for sharing your land, how to evaluate its potential for agriculture. And these sessions are being recorded, and so if you wish to maintain your privacy, of course, you can always turn your camera off or change the name that's on your screen, and eventually the videos will be available on Land for Good's YouTube channel. We've gone through the welcome and introduction portion that you see on the agenda. You notice that we have left some time for Q&A at the end. And if you have questions during the presentation, I encourage you to pop them in the chat. If it's something that seems like I could interrupt the speaker, I'll do that, but in general, we'll save the questions to the end. So again, thank you so much for being here. And with that, I'll turn it over to our first speaker. And please introduce yourself when you come up and start to speak.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Sue Lambert. I am the FarmLink coordinator in the state of Maine. I am solely focused in the state of Maine at my land trust, Maine Farmland Trust. So I'm going to talk today about some of the benefits of posting your farm and making it available for farming in your area. So one of the biggest questions I get from a lot of the folks who reach out to me, are there really people who are looking for farmland? Yes, absolutely. I have folks message, call, email all the time. So depending on the land program that is doing the matching service, there are sometimes places where the farm seekers can post their profiles. Not all of our programs utilize that portion. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to judge for the landowners to know how many farmers are out there that are actually looking for land. They might be simply looking at the farm seeker profiles and seeing that maybe there's just, 100 that are on there. Or sometimes, in my state, the numbers can get a little low when I do a little bit of housekeeping and I get rid of some folks who haven't, been active in there for a while. So they might be judging from that. Please don't judge from that. There are thousands of hits on every website that we all manage. So there are people out there and they are looking for farmland. We had one property here in Maine that was in a great location. It was a very good sized property. It had been active right up until I would say 6 months to a year before the family had reached out to post it on our site. And so I worked with the family and I got them all up online. It was a Friday afternoon. They were very happy. By Monday morning, they were calling me in a panic because they had over 24,000 views on Facebook alone. So they pretty much had to shut down everything they were doing with us simply due to being overrun by the interest that they had. So if that can give you just one example, but again, that's like a massive example of what could be, really good for a good, nice farm in a central location in the state. So there are currently hundreds of farms posted between all of the properties that all of the programs that are throughout New England. So here in Maine, we've been talking a lot about strength in numbers. And if it makes sense for a farm owner, whether they are a farmer or not, to post their farm land that is available. We look at it as, so if a farm is in the proximity of either another bigger farm or potentially some other smaller farms, we like to call those cluster farms. And we like to see the strength in numbers and how other landowners can utilize and other farm seekers can utilize the different locations for each of the properties. It could be that a bigger farm is looking to expand and they need some access to some hayland and you have hayland available. I'm sure that they would be interested in reaching out and connecting with you about that. So the other thing that can happen with a large farm, a smaller farm is that if you have multiple smaller farms in an area and you have farmers who don't have access to things quickly, it can be a benefit for whether it's veterinarians that need to visit and they can make some, good stops all along their way and they're all close. It could be so much as the farmers are sharing equipment and that sort of thing. That's just a benefit of having some other farms in your area that you're willing to work with and you can all work together, and make a system. So that's just a couple of things as far as the different size properties and how many properties that, are out there and doing the good thing. Rachel, I'm going to have you switch to the next slide. So let's see here. I'm just checking my notes. So one thing is, a benefit would be to keep the land in agriculture. Seeing a land go dormant is hard if it's good agricultural soils, if it's in a good location, and that a farmer is going to be interested in utilizing that piece of property. Another thing to think about is revenue, whether it is that you need to supplement your income with some extra cash flow, whether it is you are just looking to maybe cover your taxes or that sort of thing, or put improvements on your property. Leasing out a piece of land to a farmer can get you a decent cash flow, you know, if you're willing to work with them and get things, you know, settled at a good price and a fair price for you both. Those are just a couple of things that you can think about. So the other thing we think about with the FarmLink property programs is finding the right audience. If you're looking to sell, we have an audience that is farmer focused and they are agricultural minded and they are looking for properties. They're going to look at the soils, they're going to look at the layout of the land, they're going to look at all of that before they're necessarily going to look at your home and what kind of countertops you might have or your cabinets. So just knowing that the audience of a sale of a property in our system, they're going to want to look at your land and they're going to want to see it. So just having it in our programs versus on the MLS, that's just a way that you can kind of test the waters and see if it makes sense and if you can find some good interest in what you have to offer. So Rachel, I'm going to have you switch to slide 8. Thank you. Let's see here. I'm going to touch base briefly about leases. We have some other information coming in later on. So the lease rates that I spoke about a moment ago, where you can supplement your income, every property is going to have a different outcome for a lease rate. It's going to be determined by what you have to offer, whether or not you have large open acreage for crops. Do you have a smaller parcel with a home and a barn? Do you have water? Do you have electricity? All of these things will factor into your lease. And that's something that you can work on and figure out. Land for Good is a great resource for that. That's typically where I send folks. Also working with legal counsel. That's obviously going to be my number one suggestion is getting legal counsel on both sides. Another thing is taxes. Every state and town is going to have a different tax program and formula. So you want to make sure you're going to check in about that, whether or not your land is getting properly taxed. And again, your lease payment or getting your lease payment, that can offset the rising cost of your taxes. So thinking about your property and the property management portion of it, setting a plan and having somebody come to execute the plan for keeping your farmland active in agriculture, that will help with things like management of weeds and invasive species. It's going to help with improving your soil health. Keeping the property from being overgrown and not useful in the future. The longer it sits fallow and unused, the longer it's going to take to bring it back into good production. So just knowing that the land is going to be utilized, going to be open, those are all great things to think about when you're thinking about offering your property, whether it is a sale or a lease. So a couple of goals, and just to quickly wrap up on my section, some goals for your land. Is it to make your land available for things that I mentioned already? Is it about a legacy? And do you want to make sure that your family or your townspeople or whoever it is has the opportunity to continue to see this property thrive? Keeping the land and agriculture in your area, that's also a great one to think about for a goal. Is local food, local revenue, keeping things local, and setting some goals for the property. That is obviously a great place to start. So yeah, so up next we have Nikki with some communication points and what to expect.
Thanks, Sue. Yes, my name is Nikki Leonard. I'm a farm business planner through the Intervale Center here in Vermont. It's a nonprofit organization, as well as we're part of the state Farm Viability Network, where we get to work one-on-one with farmers on business planning and land access. And in-house at the Intervale Center, we manage our state's farm Vermont Land Link. So yeah, expectations, communication up next. What to expect. Like Sue had mentioned, right? Like you're forming your goals for this opportunity that you like to make available for farmers, you know, whether they're kind of your personal or family goals, those financial goals that Sue had mentioned, you know, taking advantage of possibly some property tax incentives. You also may have some of those sustainability goals, right? All of those goals collected kind of forms your farm vision that you want your land to be. But, right, that farm vision certainly has to be grounded in reality. You know, for example, your farm vision might be that, you know, looking outside your kitchen window into this pastoral scene of grazing cattle on your hillside, right? But if your land has kind of poor access for equipment, maybe there's no water sources, you know, maybe those grazing animals can't be fenced in appropriately, you probably won't achieve that picturesque vision. Just always remembering that on the flip side, each farmer, you know, will bring their own vision and goals and objectives for their business, right? Understanding how their potential goals and activities to be successful, you know, how that relates to your vision and how that can be all connected and worked out is going to be critical. You'll definitely have to recognize each other's goals, kind of this balance of aesthetic versus financial goals for each of you, and how the land and its uses can hold that for each other. Some of you might also be motivated by the idea of offering this opportunity to, you know, in supporting a beginning farmer. We know that the biggest challenges new farmers face is not just securing, you know, access to land, but also securing capital to start. So leasing can not only provide access to land, but also allow them to, you know, learn about how to run their operation, possibly free up some of that limited capital to buy equipment or other working assets, or even, you know, future savings that, you know, down the road they can possibly save enough to become a landowner themselves. Certainly land security is very important to a farmer, any farmer, and those new farmers might have to really completely depend on access to leased land to start. So sometimes an annual lease, a year-to-year lease can be adequate. That gives you and this farmer an opportunity to try the new arrangement out, test things out. But that kind of one-year lease does have its drawbacks, certainly. Whereas kind of pushing it a little bit longer, that longer term lease would mean that the farmer doesn't have to worry about how they're going to access land next year. It also incentivizes them to build soil quality and possibly make improvements, right? And even looking forward, you know, into the future for your own personal long-term goals, you might also consider building in options for that farmer or another farmer to purchase your property kind of at some point in the future. And we'll get into that next week as well for thinking through transfers and sales and such. Next slide. The role of the landowner. Certainly there is a full spectrum, a full range of possible roles you can take on in this farming agreement. On one side of the spectrum, you know, you have possibility of co-owning the farm business. On the other side of the spectrum, you can be absent and just, you know, take the rent. What's most important is for you is to decide how you want to be involved, but I think most importantly, and for what reasons? What reasons do you want to be involved? Generally, nobody likes unsolicited advice, right? I can relate to that. So unless there's a formal agreement that gives you a role in the business of the farm, you will not be involved in operational or management decisions. Certainly you can give advice if solicited, but if the farmer, you know, doesn't want it, they just might not be interested in your opinions about how the farm is being run. This can be difficult for some of us, but you can't take it personally, right? As a landlord, if you're in a lease arrangement, you just want to make sure that the farmer, you know, meets the expectations spelled out in the arrangement, and if they can pay rent. Really not whether they are meeting their own cash flow projections and business needs. Next slide. All right, communication. Kind of once you get to the point of identifying, you know, a suitable farmer, that you've both kind of expressed to each other your goals for the land, and you agree to move forward, right now it's time to talk details. And in talking details, kind of how you talk these details, communication is really important. You know, these details of determining when the arrangement or lease starts, when it ends, how much rent there'll be, when and how it's paid. And again, importantly, how to communicate issues should or realistically when, right, they come up. I think being able to communicate and finding a pathway to conflict resolution before, dare I say, shit hits the fan, is the best way to navigate future, stressors. Good communication at the beginning of the relationship is critical, to be able to understand each other's goals and the priorities, are met and understood and heard and addressed in the agreement. But not just right before all of this, communication is also very important during the term, just to be able to build a solid, trusting relationship, to give the farmer confidence, that in your confidence in the commitment, and also, in the future, we don't have a crystal ball, right? So if you have established good communication and pathways to find agreement, both of you should be able to be adaptive and flexible, that if there's any reason for renegotiation, you're able to find it. Next slide. All right, the issues. This list is certainly not exhaustive by any means, but it kind of gives you a sense of what to work through, what to expect to work through together before any sort of lease or agreement is made. This idea of responsibility, who's responsible for what and repairs, who's doing the routine maintenance, major capital improvements needed, who pays for what kind of insurance are we talking about, mediation, negotiation process in case of disputes. Again, key takeaway, communication is required. What are you building into the lease? Are we having annual meetings, quarterly check-ins? What happens at the end of the lease term? How does it get renewed? How does it dissolve? Again, not exhaustive, and we'll definitely get into more of these details and considerations to make when thinking through this next week. Next slide. All right, getting into the responsibility weeds a little bit. This certainly kind of tends to be one of the stickier negotiation points to work through. And again, like that list before, this is generalities, right? Of course, this should all be fleshed out in your agreement specific to both of your needs and situation. But usually, the landowner tends to be, responsible for property tax, property insurance, repairs of major problems. Again, defining what major means, that's something to figure out, and maintenance of common areas. On the farmer side, when talking about insurance, they have their own liability insurance coverage, also some property insurance, and a little bit of this insurance talk. If you're not a farmer and you don't already carry and have your own farm owner insurance, your standard homeowner policy, if something were ever to happen while commercial farming is happening on your property, that coverage won't be enough. So usually what's recommended is that the farmer will carry both the liability insurance and property loss insurance, and they'll name you as additional insured on their farm policy. Repairs of minor problems and maintenance of leased infrastructure, utilities. When talking utilities, if there's kind of that separate utility panel, great for the farm. That's easy to solve if the farmer pays for what utilities. And if not, sometimes, just having that one kind of utility bill, you can track that and kind of the difference in that increased as farming activities happen. That's kind of then an easy way to figure that out. And of course, farmers are responsible for any licenses or certifications related to their farming practices. Well, the biggest one, what about improvements, right? This outside of probably how to figure out a rental rate, this is kind of the next biggest question that we get. Usually when talking, in making major improvements, we're talking to permanent infrastructure, right? Something that the farmer can't easily take, away from the property once they leave. There's a few options out there, again, real in general, but you could cost share these improvement projects between the two of you. Maybe you pay for materials, the farmer pays for labor. Maybe you pay for it all and raise rate. raise the rent. Or sometimes what usually happens is the farmer pays for it all, and you build it into the lease that if they were to leave, right, before the lease term is up, that they will somehow be compensated for that remaining, we say, like undepreciated value. But again, all that will be worked out in detail in the lease before you enter into that arrangement. All right, next slide, please. All right, finding a farmer, what to do first. So before all of this can even happen, definitely suggest, conducting your own assessment or inventory of what you have, your land and infrastructures that you wish to make available to farmers. When thinking about land, we, again, in the details, we think about topography and slope. Can the farmer access the land and parts of the land, with their equipment? What's the land orientation? What's the microclimate? Thinking of like a farmer, they're going to want to know factors like, what's the hardiness zone, the number of frost-free days, or just precipitation patterns. Definitely you don't need to know those details, but thinking like a farmer, like that's what they're going to be assessing for themselves. But at the least, acreage, what is the mix of your forest land to open land? What is the hay land or pasture land? What's available versus tillable land? Is there opportunity for this farmer to scale up on site? Soils is a big one. We're going to want to know the types of soils and their quality. A farmer certainly is going to probably get on site to test the soil for, assessing fertility and organic matter needs. And just like selling or buying property, right? Location, location, location. Where is your property? Is it near a town? Is it on a well-traveled rural road? If a farmer has any plans for retail or direct marketing in those channels on site, they're going to want to take stock in where, you're located. And even if they're not doing direct marketing and having people pick up, CSA pickup days or a farm stand, they're going to have to, factor in for their own budget, just factor in drive time and, delivery routes and such. Infrastructure, talking buildings, right? Will that farmer need a barn, a greenhouse, a wash pack, for processing and grading, cold storage for their products, maybe even storage, for livestock feed or equipment, housing for livestock, even going deeper, any sort of specialized facilities for processing. And kind of along the lines of those buildings, does those buildings have adequate power connected to them? Will you have to kind of upgrade your voltage or amp service? Water sources, thinking about, is that water source on your property? Is it connected to municipal water? Is it, is the source surface or groundwater? And thinking about wells and, what's the flow rate of that well, thinking for irrigation purposes. Not just what are the sources, but where are they located, right? Like, are you wanting to make the land up on your top of the hillside available to a farmer? Well, how are they going to get the water up there? Fences, are there fences on site already? Roads, housing, will you be offering housing to this farmer? Even thinking about their farm employees, maybe not just housing, but, having other employees on your property as well. Basically we're trying to assess whether our land and infrastructure that you're willing to offer farmers is conducive to farming. Next slide. This is a matrix, it's always a good exercise to think like a farmer, because farmers in turn are evaluating potential properties, and how those properties fit into their business plan. So here's an example of a matrix for farmers to find suitable land to be successful. And probably a good exercise is just to see where, your property can fit into this. With that.
Thank you so much, Nikki. We have a guest speaker, as I mentioned, and I'm going to hand this to Will to introduce them.
Hi, everyone. My name is Will O'Meara. I'm the Connecticut field agent with Land for Good, and I'm one part of the Connecticut FarmLink team. I'm also a vegetable farmer in Morris, Connecticut, in the northwestern corner of the state. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Azim Blessings Kareem, who's a farmer here in Connecticut that I've gotten to work with a handful of times over the years. Azim is a farmer, educator, food justice advocate, and community organizer from Hartford, Connecticut. He works with farmers across Connecticut and New England and beyond to build a more equitable food system. And the long list of projects that Azim's had his hands in include his own farm and education and farmer training organization called Samad Gardens Initiative, the I Got Next Farmers Coalition. He's led the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Farmer Circle with the New Connecticut Farmer Alliance. He has facilitated the Access to Information and Education group within the Connecticut Department of Ag's DEI initiative, and so much more. So I couldn't be happier that Azim was able to join us today, and I will go ahead and turn it over. And Azim, if you want to just maybe start out by talking a bit about your farm and your land journey, and we can go from there. I've got some questions, and I'm sure the audience will have questions as well.
Peace, everybody. First off, thank you for the intro. I submitted a very short bio, and apparently it didn't have enough bells and whistles on it, and I forgot about half the stuff you mentioned. So thank you. I had to write that down, make a more, I don't know, impressive sounding bio. But yeah, my name is Azim Blessings. I'm from Hartford, Connecticut. And I was asked to talk about my journey with farmland access. It's been quite a roller coaster. Our first year starting our business, we had 7 different locations, not big locations, just small urban community garden plots here and there, and a random way, a different part of the state. We've experienced a lot of different things as far as the nonprofit industrial complex. Poverty pimping, essentially, is the word, where they take a bunch of people who fit the disenfranchised and historically underserved and BIPOC and all the buzzwords. We all fit that stuff, so it makes them look good when they apply for grants, and they don't fulfill their end of the deal as far as what we're promised in terms of opportunity and land access and tool access and education. That's been a constant battle, not just for myself, but for farmers all across the state of Connecticut and beyond. Land access is the number one difficulty with farmers across the board, regardless of class, color, or creed. In fact, only 25% of farmers own the land they farm on. Period. That's a concerning statistic. So we've had lots of difficulty with the nonprofits having access to things that we need, and them saying they'll do things for us, and we don't ever get the things that they promised. But they take the grant money and they take vacations. They take the money from the government, and they end up doing all kinds of great things for themselves. And not to name drop, one of the places we leased land from, they had trash in their topsoil a couple of times. Another friend of mine offered to give them clean topsoil for the farmers of color, and they turned him down. We've had a whole other crazy situation in another part of the state that was actually even worse. And part of the trouble too is we're a farm business, we have needs, right? So it's not just having a land to grow on. This part of the property had a heated greenhouse, right? That's important, get our seed starts in early. It had cold storage, like a nice large cold storage, multiple shelving units. It was awesome. They had storage for equipment and all kinds of other things. They had high tunnels, and they had space, and it's prime farmland. So it's hard to find all these, and they also had classrooms as well, right? Because a lot of us who have leased there, we're also educators. So it had a lot of beautiful utilities that we would love to use. They were not very good in how they handled themselves. We've had a year with them recently where we had to work the whole farm ourselves. They got rid of their farm manager unexpectedly, and the people themselves who ran the nonprofit knew nothing about how to operate the farm. We had no institutional support. So the 5 of us who leased land there had to figure out how to we had to figure out where the water switch was so we could turn the water on. We cleaned the bathrooms, we did everything. We literally ran the entire property. I believe it's 11 acres or more. We only used about 8 or 10 of those acres. We had to try to clean the cold storage units, and it was not taken very good care of. So there was mold growing in there and a lot of broken equipment. So we had to figure out how to do pretty much everything ourselves. And then to top it all off, an airplane crashed into the farm field. No one ever believes that. That was one of the funniest insurance calls I ever had in my entire life. Like, hello, thanks for calling insurance. How can I help you? A plane crashed to my farm field. Blink, what? No, seriously, a plane crashed on my farm field, and there's nothing that covers that. USDA can't help you. NRCS can't help you. There's nothing that you can do about that. So yeah, there's been a lot of difficulty and a lot of unbelievable stories that people would never believe if I didn't have pictures and if people didn't witness the things I'm talking about. There was a big issue of the whole property pimping thing. There's a big issue of people, BIPOC farmers and stuff like that for so-called incubator programs, but not actually offering the resources that are promised. That's a big issue I see across the board working with BIPOC farmers across the region. Other issues would also include landowners not knowing what a farm looks like. We've had one instance with a landowner, a nice older guy whose father ran that farm for, God, I don't know, 40, 50 years, 30 years, something like that. And when he looked at us to try to start using something land, it didn't look this way his father did when his father was running it. So he was very in the way, and we didn't really have any control of anything. So control is a big issue, because he was using more conventional methods. We use more regenerative methods. We use methods that actually add to the earth. We don't till the soil into desert sands where you can see prophets and camels walking across the sands. That's not our method. Everyone's got their own thing though, right? But he was constantly on us about, well, my dad did it this way. I'm like, that's cool. If you like us to run our program, and he did a little bit, but we largely did it the way his father did it, and it wasn't the most successful. We've had things just go inside the ground and just not really come up the way they're supposed to. But he doesn't know anything about the actual soil science and what the soil actually needs and how to amend the soil. He doesn't know about that. So we didn't have the greatest crop from that. We have another instance, and this is part of the problem with some of the handshake leases that are not very well defined. Another instance, a guy who, and our friends were on there last year. At any point he decides, well, I need you to do this, and you're going to do this, whatever this is. It could be plant a random cover crop in the area that's not even being farmed on or something. You kind of have to bend to his whim and what he wants you to do, because your seeds are already in the ground, your crops are already in the ground. It's his land. He could just ban you from coming there and make a legal issue out of it, right? And there's no real lease agreement that really protects us. So there's a lot of different issues. Another issue is a lot of people who own land and like to lease to farmers, they're not farmers. They don't know what farms actually look like when they're being productive. And a lot of people have this fairy tale idea that farms are supposed to be really neat and clean and nice looking, and they can be, but an active farm tends to be a bit on the messy side. You got equipment and they'll leave equipment out in the middle of the field and stuff like that. But people tend to have an idea of what a farm looks like and tend to take issue when your farming doesn't look as clean or as neat as they'd like it to look, or they don't have reasonable expectations for production. Like, why can't you do this, or why can't you? It's a business, right? It's a business. Economics are important. It costs X amount for the seeds and for the inputs, and then you don't get your return on investment, depending on the crop, anywhere from a couple of weeks till a couple of months to several months. I've had landowners desire that we offer them our product. And again, I'm a nice guy. I don't mind giving people, we do donate produce here and there. But if we're already leasing the land from you, that shouldn't be a demand if it's not part of the lease agreement. I've seen all manner of things happen from people being taken advantage of. I've seen landowners be inappropriate with female lessees, the word lessees. And again, once your crops are in the ground, it's hard to get up and walk away. That's part of the problem. And then one other thing to think about as far as being a person of color, just because you have land in a particular area and that area is cool for you, doesn't mean that that area is safe or welcoming to us. There's a situation right now in upstate New York where a sister bought land and is getting terrorized in that area. And she's trying to sell the land and move out and have a restraining order on her neighbors because they are vandalizing her vehicles. They are throwing bricks and other things inside her windows. Her children can't go to school because they're not safe. And people think this is post-racial America. Everything's different now. I find that's not the case. I'm actually in Detroit right now, building this is Canada behind me. That's Canada. That's Windsor, Canada. This is the river. And I'm in Detroit, working with actually a bunch of farmers right now. So I just happen to be out this way. I'm very serious about building these food systems. But yes, these are different things to think about. I've had areas where one brother bought land and a white guy rolled up to his land on his farm, put a gun to his head and said, "N-word, what are you doing here?" These are things that a lot of us face that everyone doesn't necessarily think about. If that's a little too intense or whatever, it is what it is. I've experienced all kinds of extreme racism myself. Everyone ain't cool. It's just how it is. In fact, I'll give it, shoot.
No, I just appreciate you sharing vulnerably about kind of the reality for you and your farm and the situations that you've faced. I think you spoke to a lot of important issues around the power dynamics that can happen in a lease, the sort of reasons to have really concrete agreements so that expectations are clear, as far as, you know, everything you mentioned from this expectation that crops are also going to be part of your lease when, you know, you're already paying a lease separately, or having access to infrastructure and equipment in a reasonable manner. These are all things that, you know, hopefully by having your perspective represented here, we can get more landowners to kind of understand what it is that farmers need out of these deals. And certainly kind of understanding that not all farm seekers are going to have the same experience on a piece of land, and kind of being aware of, you know, those needs for Black farmers or, you know, women farmers are also really important to bring to the forefront. So I really appreciate you taking it there. If you don't mind, I have a few questions, like, you know, kind of more specific questions that I just want to follow up with you on, and then we'll leave some time for audience Q&A. So I think you got at this a little bit before, but decision to lease or to buy land, sometimes it's not that much of a decision, but can you talk about how your farm thinks about like leasing land versus buying land? Do you have goals for the future, and what would need to happen in order to make that those goals a possibility?
For me, what I look for in terms of purchasing versus leasing is important because I don't want to be permanent everywhere. We're looking for permanence in a couple of specific places. So, for example, one of our goals is we want to have year-round growing in multiple locations. For example, we bought some land in Georgia that we'll get to really activate the way we want to in maybe 3 or so years. But we would love to have land in different locations to have year-round production. One of my mentors was very strong about that. He had land in Connecticut and in Florida, and he would fly between the two locations on a near weekly basis. Leasing is cool depending on what your focus and opportunities are. So we finally have a healthy leasing agreement in Bloomfield, Connecticut, a place called Our Farm, AUERFARM, where we get to bring some of our education and you get to use their classroom space. And we also get access to the commercial kitchen. And and in return, we're bringing a whole different audience to our farm, and we're getting to have our own incubator farm program there. So these are some of the things I look for in the lease specifically, right? Because maybe if I purchase land, like the land I got I purchased with a group, has to be developed and stuff. But if I do get some land that is more or less raw and doesn't have infrastructure, I'd be looking to lease to help with the utilities I would be desirous of. For example, classroom space, commercial kitchen space, cold storage, any type of season extension, high tunnels and greenhouses, especially heated greenhouses. So if everything isn't on one property, which would make it more expensive. So that's one thing for me.
That's great. I think that's a really sort of pragmatic approach to leasing that, honestly is a little different from a lot of the farm seekers we talk to, who are kind of looking for that one-stop shop. But it's a good example that farm seekers are looking for different things. And I think similar to what Sue talked about, people might be looking for land to expand or, a place where they can process produce or whatever. So you kind of have to take an assessment of all those things you have on your, property before you make it available, so that a farmer like Azim can figure out how it might fit into their operation.
I'll also quickly add to that, the type of soil and type of land, the soil, what the soil structure is like, right? So if we decide we want to grow a particular kind of crop for whatever reason, and it's not really conducive to the kind of soil and land that we have, that would be another reason to look for something to lease to get a crop from whatever else.
Absolutely. Yeah, and with climate change getting more unpredictable as far as extreme weather events, it can be nice to have different kinds of soils in different places, so that you have a little bit more maneuverability and resilience when it comes to extreme rains or drought or whatever. So you mentioned your lease with Our Farm. How did you guys find that arrangement?
It was kind of a stroke of dumb luck, I guess. It's one of those random parents' neighbor saw a job posting on Facebook and sent it to my wife, who sent it to me and was like, hey, part-time hours being a farm educator. I was like, I'll look at that. Sure, why not? I applied. I got the job. And from there, the executive director, Erica Fern, and their farm manager at the time, who had since left to do a big farm program in Ireland, they were very impressed with me and my ideas. And a lot of people are familiar with the horror story that we have up in Simsbury, Connecticut, where the plane crashed and everything else has been going wrong for literally no good reason. So they did offer us some space there. And from there, Erica and I just chopped it up. We went back and forth on ideas on how to make agriculture in the state more equitable. So not just something good for our farm, but something good for everybody, right? Because our farm is in Bloomfield, and Bloomfield is largely populated by the Jamaican population and Caribbean people. And Erica says all the time, like, as a white woman, I'm not reflective of the majority of the population of the town that our farm is in. I would like to bring more of that here. So we just like ideas that became beneficial for both our farm business and their 4-H education center. And that's how the lease came to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would just push back on you saying dumb luck, because I feel like, you and your farm's reputation is really strong at this point, and people know who you guys are. So, somebody sent you that job opportunity, but it's like you are active in the community, and I think people really respect your work, and so it makes people want to work with you. And so that's, more if I had an audience full of farm seekers, I'd say, find ways to get involved, similar to Azim, in ways that you're passionate about. But I think, seeing that it gives landowners confidence in what you're going to do with that arrangement.
I appreciate the words.
Absolutely. Let's see. And so yeah, this Simsbury situation that you've mentioned a few times, like you said, if you work as a ag service provider in Connecticut, you know what's going on here. Just a bit of context for the audience. There was just a transition in nonprofit leadership, and then kind of the surprise termination of a lease that was leaving 5 farmers with subleases, kind of with no recourse. And so I was briefly involved, kind of working with Manny and Zania on their end of it. The Department of Ag was involved, trying to just kind of do whatever they could to keep this lease going.
I work with DOAG, so I was able to pull the commissioner in. He helped out, but they kept, not they as in DOAG, the town who is now stuck with the farm, who are looking to wash their hands of it, they didn't keep any. So
yeah. So aside from that instance, have you done any work with the FarmLink program? Like, have you had Kip out, or we've spoken a few times, but never done any like formal lease work, but have you utilized FarmLink for any other reasons?
As a land seeker, yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been to a couple of land access events. And even if I may or may not be looking to purchase at this particular moment in time, I still think it's a good event, and I would like to keep going just to potentially be a resource as someone who's seen a lot of different things play out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always love to have, farmers who are maybe in the position that you were in a few years ago, speaking with people like you to kind of have that real world guidance, to help them think about different pathways forward. So I appreciate you guys always being involved in, the mixers and the other events that that we put on. Let's see.
Oh, and to answer your question, Kip has been out there. He's been out there.
Yeah, for those of you in the audience who might be calling in from Connecticut, through our FarmLink program, we have a consulting soil and conservation scientist that can come out. We usually come out in a group and help with soil assessments and looking at farm infrastructure and stuff like that. So certainly be in touch if you would benefit from a little bit of guidance on that front. And if you're outside of Connecticut, we can probably, make referrals and connections with people who can do the same. Let's see. We've got a few minutes, and then we're going to open it up for some more Q&A from the audience. Any final words of advice for, landowners who are considering making their land available through a farm lease?
I would always say consider your why. Like why is that appealing to you? And I say there's only like one or two wrong answers, right? But other than that, there's a million reasons that are good for a why. Is it because you're looking to expand access to farmers because we are a dying breed in America? Is it, there's a million reasons that you can be passionate about. Do you want to expand access because you want to see more women take the full front in this men-dominated industry? Is it because you want to see your property, maybe it used to be a farm generations ago, and you want to see it activated again because your grandfather used to be a farmer and you're not, and you would just love to have that activated again? Like whatever the reason is, if it's good enough for you, and it's a strong enough of a reason, I think you'll be all right with the right people. So yeah, that'd be my word.
Awesome. I love that. Find your why. All right. So at this stage, I would love to open it up for questions from the audience. Feel free to, raise your hand and I can kind of facilitate people asking questions verbally, or if you prefer to put it in the chat, I can take those questions that way as well. And these questions could be for Azim, it could be for the panelists generally. We just want to leave the last half hour or so, for more kind of open discussion. Donna? Don, I can't tell if you're speaking, but it looks like you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, sounds
Okay.
good.
Okay, yeah. My parents have two farms. One's in Pennsylvania and one's in New York State. And my dad actually was an active farmer. He used to farm hay. He used to sell hay pretty much to the Amish and to a local racetrack in New York, upper New York State. And unfortunately, he got sick and he recently died. And he left. He stopped farming probably, I don't know. He was probably like a good 10 years ago. So the area that he used to grow alfalfa, oats, wheat and hay, and I mean, great soil. I mean, the area used to be covered by Oneida Lake. It's all real fertile, covered with fish and everything else. That whole area, but you can grow anything. Pretty much, I try to lease the land out to area farmers, but it's grown up too much, and nobody wants to put the time or the investment in to get it back to workable. They basically want me to pay them and to get it back, and I can't do it myself because my dad's equipment is probably like 70 years old, and it's all over the fields. And I mean, I could find it, but I mean, the tractors are not even workable. And so I'm kind of, I don't know really what to do because I must have called like probably 30 farmers in the area, and nobody, I mean, one guy offered to do it, but he said, oh, well, it'll take me 5 years to even work it for 10 acres. And that's like nothing. So I'm not really sure if, I mean, I put in for some grants. I haven't gotten anything for farm equipment just to get, because I could do, at least get it tilled and everything, like, cut and tilled. And, but the other issue is there's a lot of trees growing up now, like small trees, bushes and things like that. I need some, and I'm not, 20 years old anymore. I can't hook some chains up to the thing and rip the trees out the ground. So I'm wanting to know what to do with that property. And then there's another property that my parents have. My mom is still alive, and I mean, that's got everything. That's got like it's got an orchard. It's got one of my relatives haze it. It's got a pond. You could fish in it, and so right now all the relatives are haying it for free, picking the fruit for free, fishing for free, and hunting for free. And there's, my mom has no insurance or anything like that, but I'd actually like to get it back so she at least makes some money from the haying, because there's probably 20 acres of hay you could at least get from this property. And so I'm two different issues, two different like area, one's in Pennsylvania, one's in New York, and I'm not really knowing where to start.
Yeah. Well, I can take a quick stab at those questions, and then we'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards in emails with some
Okay.
more ideas as well. With the first property, I think this is a really common issue. It doesn't take long for a farm field to kind of grow up into, shrubs and invasives and small saplings and things like that. Here in Connecticut, we're lucky to have a program called the Farmland Restoration Program. There might
Okay.
be something similar in your state. And rather than sometimes grants for equipment tend to be kind of few and far between and hard to find. But you might be able to find some grants out there that can work towards, paying somebody to come in and rehab the land. And, it is if a farmer is going to come in and grow there, they would likely need, like you said, compensation to come and do that work to get it ready to grow. So as much as you can have the property in sort of good condition before a farmer comes in, the easier it will be to lease.
That's what everybody wants, and I don't have the resources to buy the, and
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Yeah, so I'll look and see if you send me an email, I'll put my email in the chat for everybody. If you send me an email after this meeting, I can try and see if there's some state specific programs that might help with what you're discussing. And with the other piece, all these different users on a piece of land and no one's necessarily contributing, it makes a lot of sense, I think, to even with family members in some cases try and establish a, just pretty basic lease that allows them to do those activities. Even if they could cover your mom's property taxes or something like that and just kind of lessen the burden, or help with the upkeep of the property, then, that is a pretty reasonable thing to do. Or look at, ways for people outside the family to come in and do some of those different things and again contribute. So if you'd be open to talking more about that, we could definitely provide you with some templates and ideas for that.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I've actually tried that to get relatives to pay or to lease, and nobody's, because everybody wants everything for nothing. So
Yeah.
it's really sad. But what are you going to do? And there's no insurance on any of these properties.
Yeah.
So
well, I would highly encourage you to. I've got a resource on insurance. Maybe we can actually put that in the chat.
okay.
I think for some people you'd be surprised at how reasonable some of those farm insurance policies can be. And as Nikki said, there's a lot of things that won't be covered by your typical homeowners. And if you've got all those different things going on the property, there's a lot of liability. So Rachel, would you be able to throw that insurance and liability guide in the chat? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Donna.
Sure.
Is that a hand raise? Go right ahead.
Hi, thanks. Is Azim still around?
I believe so, yep.
Yes, ma'am, I am.
I want to say you are the most resilient person I have ever heard from. So you keep it up. And I know farmers need to be resilient. But you've got an overabundance of that, and I think it's wonderful. I have a question for you though. So I have a farm that multiple generations have farmed, but right now it's just hayed. And Azim, it needs some capital improvements. One is, I think we need to sink a well, but there's many options to what could be done there. But since I'm not a farmer, and I might even be willing to invest in some of this to make this happen because I want so badly for a farm to be there, what would you recommend to a landowner on how to approach paying for capital improvements. For example, there's a cost share, but if you're just starting out, you're not going to have any money, right, to do this as a farmer. And then there's also grants. What do you recommend for making those capital improvements in terms of leasing the land to someone?
First, I'd say thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. As far as the capital improvements, I would first start by trying to first off try to get find someone who has a vision. That's the first thing I would say. Find someone who has a vision about what they want to do, right? Because if I don't, like, even as a farmer, if I don't know and I'm just like, woo, I'm gonna do this, or maybe I'll do that, maybe I'll do this, right? And you come talk to me about being there, so it can look like this, it can look like that. It's not this really decisive enough to really hit the ground running and like really make something happen. That's usually kind of like we'll see what happens kind of energy. So that's one thing. And I would want to find someone who has a vision and we can build on that vision together. Another thing, there are many resources available to help with things like grants, and there's different organizations that help. Are you in Connecticut by chance?
You just
We
froze
heard-
up. I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
I'm back. Okay, I'm back. Are you in Connecticut by chance?
Am I what?
What state are you in?
Massachusetts.
Mass. Okay. So there's a couple of resources out in Massachusetts. I actually have a good friend of mine from Massachusetts at this big convention I'm at right now with me. You can reach out to NOFA Mass as a good starting point. There's a couple of, and if you ask for Anna Muhammad, that's a good person to start. She's very aware of a lot of resources that come down in Massachusetts for agriculture. So that's one thing I can say. So to be aware of the resources you have. As far as other things with the capital improvement, so it's paid currently. Do you have any idea about what you might want to see? Vegetable production or?
I want to see whatever the farmer thinks he can do with the property. So this is why I want to talk to farmers. And I've talked to two so far, a veg farmer. Actually, they're both veg farmers. But right down the street, believe it or not, there's a dairy farmer. And nobody wants to go into dairy now because there's not a lot of money to be made in that. Got to have a lot of head to make some money. So I want to work with the farmer and see what the farmer can do, what they want to do. So you're right, the vision thing. I just
Vision is
want to
very
make it happen.
important. All right, I'll also put my email in the chat in a second, so anyone can reach out to me about whatever. But the
Okay,
vision is
thanks.
definitely important because there are a lot of really like go-getter people who have a decent enough of a business sense, and they know how to have create multiple sources of income through
Yep.
agriculture. So that's something that I also say is important. Is
Okay.
that kind of understanding, because you're right, dairy does have a lot of overhead, but if people know how to utilize the market, like I'll just talk about some Mod Gardens initiative, for example. We teach classes. People buy our workshops and they pay for me speaking. We have kind of like Kip, I can go out and walk land with people and kind of help talk to them what's possible. We do cut flowers, we do herbs, we do teas, we do vegetable production, and these are all different enterprises. So how do you really multiply your enterprises? These are the kinds of things you want to start looking at in terms of potential partnerships.
Yeah, I think if you don't mind exchanging emails, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat right now.
Okay, thanks for your feedback. Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I love that exchange because I do think, things like a well that are going to stick with the property doesn't necessarily make sense for the, tenant to make those investments. But, as the landowner thinking about these things, designing a farm or designing those improvements with a farmer in mind, with the type of business in mind, is really good. I will say at the very least, especially with, you know, what we've had in terms of drought and things like that the last few years, you know, almost every type of farm operation is going to need a good well, whether it's for watering livestock or irrigation or what have you. So that's not a bad place to start, regardless of the type of operation that's going on.
Yep.
Thank you,
Oh,
Lisa.
I'll also say
Yep,
real quick.
thank you.
I'll
Yeah,
also
go
say
ahead.
real quick, to learn the kind of soil and stuff that you have, right?
Mhm.
If we make that process easier, like it's one thing if someone's advertising land to me and I have to go out and I have to take soil tests, and I have to kind of look around and see what this way the land is like. If you can have that information available, it'd be easier for me as a farmer to look at the property and see if it's already kind of in alignment with what I want.
Yep.
Right? Because
I've
if
got-
it's certain kind of soil, if there's a certain kind of soil type, it might not be congruent with my stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's all high quality ag soils. If you look at surficial soil maps, I'm a scientist. I've taken soil samples. And you know, there's the aerials. I can send you a lot of the information.
You are way ahead of the curve. Congratulations. Man,
I
you were
want
doing
it
it
to
right.
happen. Do you get the
Yeah.
gist of it?
And this is a
Thank
great,
you.
this is also a great exchange for everybody else on the call. You know, you don't need to be a scientist. It helps to find this information, and this is something that we can help you with. So, you know, when you list your property, having as much information available at that time as possible is going to help, you know, farmers make informed decisions. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
And thanks to Land for Good too for having this, and it's been helpful.
Thanks so much. Any other questions from the audience? We got plenty of time, so happy to keep these going. Any other questions? I'm happy to also move towards wrapping things up if people are feeling like they've gotten what they need out of this. But I've just seen a couple people turn their cameras on, so I'm guessing maybe they've got questions for me. Go right ahead, Russ.
Will, yeah. I've looked into well, a little background. I've got about 25 acres of land, about 7 is clear. It's been abandoned from farming for decades, I guess. I do vegetable gardens, and it's good agricultural soil, although it's kind of high elevation and the microclimate's a little cold. My problem, I guess, is that it's so small that it's I'm looking for a way to do it simply and cheaply to make it available to, say, somebody wanted to do vegetable gardens, or the fields would be good to fence. But when I spoke with someone from Land for Good, basically they're saying, well, you got to come up with like $5,000 to fence it first. And like, I couldn't lease it for enough money to make that back in a reasonable amount of time. I've got a chicken coop. So I'm looking for some sort of inexpensive and possibly informal way to make it available to, say, a young couple or someone who wants to do chickens, vegetable garden, without me spending a fortune on it.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife's from a farming village in Thailand, and she absolutely won't let me do the farming. Too much work, not enough money, and I'm old. So what do you suggest for something in this like micro category that I can't invest a lot into?
So I would say a few things. Like we have farm seekers who are looking for a very wide range of farm sizes, field sizes, you know, a lot of, you know, small market gardens that only require, you know, half an acre to, you know, a couple of acres for vegetable production, and they grow very intensively. And then, yeah, we get people looking for hundreds of acres for, cropland for, silage and hay and other things like that. So, really almost no parcel is too small. And I think just advertising accurately as far as what what you have and what you're willing to put in is the best you can do. Another, when you think about things like fencing or other improvements that might need to be made for a farmer to work there. One thing you can think about doing is creating a sufficiently long lease term that the farmer can make those investments and feel comfortable in making those investments, or be eligible for grants that typically require a slightly longer term lease. Somewhere in the sort of 5-year ballpark is pretty common for a lot of the programs that are available through USDA. So if you can offer that term, then they can kind of have a pathway towards some of those improvements on their own, even if you aren't able to make that investment yourself.
I think more than 5 years.
Yeah, and it depends on the type of investment you're talking about. And as you said, some of them can be really costly if you're going to do a deer fence or permanently fenced paddocks or things like that. But definitely, as you talk with farmers, kind of understand their operations, and hay farmers typically don't need a super long-term lease. They might appreciate it for the consistency and the security. As you get into other more intensive types of farming, farmers are typically going to want to see that lease go a little bit longer for the exact reasons that you brought up.
I think just to hop in, the through line of all these examples coming up, I think, is to be just super transparent and realistic about what you're offering initially. And kind of like Azim said, find that farmer who has that vision and create a longer term implementation plan together, and that kind of financial cost share together. And I think kind of adding up those improvement needs, you see each other's initial investments and risks, but being as transparent and doing that together, I think, is important.
Nikki, you scared me earlier with talk of lease agreements and insurance and so on, and I almost left the meeting and ran away screaming. But I understand these things are necessary. So.
Well, stick with us. Stay in tuned. I was going to say, probably never recommend anything informal, right? So on behalf of advocating for farmers, like formalizing that agreement is definitely recommended. So it's okay if it's scary up front, but there's definitely resources to support you through this process.
Thank you.
And I'll just jump in about that a little bit. I think it's not uncommon for people to feel a little nervous about a formal agreement. And I think that makes sense, right? Like, people don't want to feel trapped. I think that's a pretty common feeling for people to have. The reality of a formal agreement is that it's there to support you, and you and the farmer can continue working on creating that agreement until it feels supportive to all the parties involved. And it's there for you as a backstop in case you get into a difficult time. So a lot of times what can happen is, because we're humans with different needs, if we end up bumping into each other and get frustrated and get in our feelings, if we don't have some formal agreement that we made back when we liked each other and we're getting along, it makes it a lot harder to work through that difficult time in a way that we feel good about later. And so I think even though it makes sense that a formal agreement can be a little scary, in reality, it makes the whole long term, however long it is, whether it's a year, 5 years, 10 years, the rest of your life, it can make that, in actuality, it can make it healthier. It can help you feel better about it as you go along, so you don't end up saying or doing something that doesn't really align with who you are as a person. There's some thoughts on the benefits of formality.
Well said, Rachel.
Agreed. Yeah, leases, formal agreements are great because they protect you. They make sure that you don't get screwed over, right? And it protects everyone involved. And it also helps to get different parties to understand how to work together, and helps people form a better vision of what they want to do. That's the other part of it that a lot of people don't consider. So you're not trapping yourself. And if I'm leasing from you and I do things I shouldn't have done, and I'm being a snake, a not nice person about things, or if I violate the lease agreement by not being a good person intentionally, then you have an out, and you have the right of legal uses to get me off of your property, versus a handshake agreement. I can make up anything, right? So a lot of different things. And like, if I have my goals and my visions, you have your goals and your visions, if we build a lease together, we can actually help benefit both of us in putting our visions together in a way that would make it more mutually successful.
Azim, you're the voice of experience there. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And yeah, Land for Good, when we work on leases and succession plans with farmers, you know, we always start with that vision and goals thing, because if you can get in alignment on the vision and goals, then having all the, you know, tedious legalese stuff fall into place is a lot easier. So I definitely like that process. But we saw a hand from the Kennebec Land Trust. I think you're still on mute.
All set?
Yep.
Thanks for the program. I'm the executive director here at the Kennebec Land Trust, and we sometimes, coincidentally today I have a meeting, are working with landowners who are pursuing a conservation easement. And as part of our evaluation of their land, we note that they have prime farmland soil. And so we're trying to open up their ideas to future possibilities for that land in terms of a farmer who might want to come later on and you know, use that farm in a way that hasn't been used in the recent past. Do you have any good examples of projects where you've worked with land trusts where they negotiated a conservation easement and ended up with a farmer, you know, subsequently 2 or 3 landowners down the line that we could point people to, success stories in that area? So the short of it is sometimes the current landowner doesn't see the agricultural values, and we're trying to pitch that to them and trying to encourage them to keep their mind open to this future possibility. But if you had some examples of where that has played out in the landscape successfully, we could use those when we're talking to landowners.
Sure. I think between the 4 of us on the call, there are probably dozens of examples. The conservation world is a big one, as I'm sure you know, working in it. I think one of the things, just as like a guiding principle that we try and talk with landowners about, and retiring farmers and everyone, is that the way the land was used in the past is not necessarily how it's going to be utilized in the future. You know, most of New England has been farmed at some point in some way. You know, as the industry changes and the markets change, those different uses are they come into fashion and go out of fashion over the years. So one example, this one didn't necessarily leave agriculture for all that long, but I worked extensively with the Cheshire Land Trust in the town of Cheshire, Connecticut, smack dab in the center of the state. They acquired a really beautiful farm called the Ives Farm, and it had kind of been through the typical New England cycle. At some point it was a dairy, at some point there were some orchards, and then most recently it was sort of in disuse. So after a lot of work on the land trust part, they were able to get a new vegetable farmer on it. And then when they sold the development rights and put a conservation easement on the land, they're then, as a land trust, they're then reinvesting that money into the farm infrastructure for where they think that farm is going in the future. You know, with the eye towards supporting kind of multiple farm enterprises on this very large and productive piece of farmland. They're an open book. I'd be happy to connect you with their executive director, who's just been really wonderful to work with. And I'm sure there are some other examples that we can come up with for you that, you know, might be a little bit closer to the situation you're describing.
Yeah, I'm thinking all of a sudden, just listening to you talk, I'm picturing having a 3-minute video to send to a landowner that has a little bit of that narrative about the history of the New England landscape. And in particular, you know, it's coincidental that we have 2 projects now where prime farmland soil is a key natural asset on the land. And if you don't have that framework as a landowner now, and you can't see that in the future, just some inspiring maybe story about a successful farm and that transition from, you know, a landowner who's well-intentioned and doesn't want to see the land develop, but can't make that leap in their mind yet to see it as a farm.
Yeah, it can be a tricky one, but at the same time, I really love, you know, not all the land trusts that we work with kind of have the eye towards working lands that it sounds like you do. And there is sometimes just an emphasis on open space, but it's almost a, you know, it's a shame to not manage those agricultural lands to the sort of maximum potential. So if you send us a follow-up email, I think we can definitely point you towards some more helpful examples.
Can I make a suggestion? Kennebec, get in touch with the Mount Grace Land Trust in Massachusetts. Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust. They
Yep,
have,
I know their work.
yeah, they have agricultural projects.
Yep.
And a food co-op.
Sometimes too, I was gonna say, sometimes too, that motivation and inspiration and talking with landowners and considering long-term conservation as an option for their plans for their property, it does most often come down to kind of the numbers, right? And I think dispelling that, no, you're still gonna get compensated at market value for this time, you know, for that easement plus, you know, the agricultural value if they do and you know, intend to sell it. But sometimes just kind of doing that math, like most people don't understand, they think they're limiting their return, you know, cap on their farm. But I don't know if to include that little bit of calculation in the video, but I think sometimes that financial conversation needs to happen because a lot of people just don't understand.
Agreed.
Uh,
I would also say real quick too, that a lot of people who are familiar with farming, because right, everyone used to be a farmer back in the day in some way, shape, or form, and then as everything kind of got systematized and grocery stores and stuff like that, we've all kind of been pushed away from it. A lot of people have this notion that farming is some type of poor people or poverty thing or slavery thing. So breaking that notion that many of us have unconsciously is extremely important. It's extremely important. And the fact too is that ever since 2020 happened, the pandemic happened, there's been a lot more interest and a lot more money and a lot more attention and a lot more marketability in agriculture that you can utilize to your advantage. And you can, I don't know who you're talking to, but I always consider if someone is, I'm gonna have an emotional story for them. If it's strictly about the economics, I'm gonna have an economic story for them and talking about, you know, how they can meet whatever their economic goals are. So just different things to think about. Because when it comes to, if we're in a position we have to do the same type of things over and over again, I just developed more or less the same kind of answers over and over again because people are going to ask you the same type of questions.
just want to mention that Rachel just put in the chat a link to our evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to fill that out. It'll help us improve future events and programs. And we are just about at time, but I'm going to take one last question from J.E. and D. Bryant / June.
Yeah, this is a family thing I represent. I've talked to Sue. We've have my folks' homestead listed on the farm trust, and we're kind of identifying a farmer. And this might have been covered, but I guess I'm trying to figure out, my mom has limited resources to do any improvements. And I'm wondering what access there is and how difficult it might be to get, if we were to, as the owner, landowner, to choose some capital improvements. Like, for instance, they have a dug well. It's never run out, but with a farm running, which we had a farm when we were kids, but not huge agriculture, we might need to drill a well. Are there grants out there for landowners for things such as that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the Natural Resource Conservation Service at USDA
Okay.
has quite a bit. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a chicken and egg situation as far as like when you have, a business entity operating on the land and when they consider you a farmer or not. But it's definitely a good idea to reach out to your county office and talk through some of the programs with them. And then Sue probably has a better idea, any like state of Maine specific programs that might be there.
Okay. All right. We're in Kennebec County, like Kennebec Land Trust. So we're right near the capital. So we'll check out the resources there.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're really glad that you can make the time. Every one of us has put our emails in the chat, so if you have questions, please feel free to reach out at any time. Please do make a few minutes to fill out that evaluation form. It helps us a lot, and we're looking forward to seeing you next Wednesday at noon, same Zoom link. Thanks
Rachel,
again, and thanks.
I believe it's Thursday next week. I just wanted to clarify
That's
that.
what I meant. Thanks, Sue.
Yes.
And special thanks to Azim for taking time to join us from Detroit.